All right, welcome once again to my back bar, and we're going to do a seasonal tasting here today. And this class is in October, so it makes it very fitting that we are going to drink some Oktoberfest beers. Now, Oktoberfest, as you are probably aware by now, actually relates to harvest, and most Oktoberfest take place in September. Nevertheless, it's October and we're going to drink some Oktoberfest. It also means that it is Halloween. So we're going to get into some sort of Halloween themed beers. But let's start with the Oktoberfest. When you are heading into fall, when you're starting into September, we see the Oktoberfests come out. And we're going to drink two that are very traditional Oktoberfest from Germany. So we're going to drink two versions of an Oktoberfest from Paulaner. One is really kind of the traditional German Oktoberfest. And what we're going to see from this beer is it's very light in color. This is straw colored, you can see right through it. Looks like a light beer. I don't get a whole lot of nose off of this beer. Smell a little bit of the grain. I smell no hop. And what I taste is a very nice, crisp beer that's not far off from a Pilsner. So that's not typically what we think of as an Oktoberfest here in the US. When we make and drink Oktoberfest in the US, most of them are following more closely to the tradition of the second Paulaner Oktoberfest, which is an Oktoberfest Marzen. Now, Marzen is a sub-style. Both of these are lagers. Marzen is a sub-style of an Oktoberfest, so it's a sub-style of a lager. And you're going to notice that when you take a look at these two beers, you're going to see that they are different in color. Now, a Marzen is typically going to use darker malt, and you're going to get a little more of those flavors out of it that we associate more with Oktoberfest beers in the US. Now, when I say that, what I'm talking about is kind of that flavor profile that goes with fall. You know, think of sort of, burning leaves and, spices, those things that we really kind of associate with the fall, the smells, the flavors. Burning leaf is a thing to kind of keep in mind when you taste a lot of Oktoberfest, because you're going to get malt that's roasted in a way that's kind of giving you that little bit of a sort of not quite smoky flavor, but a little sort of crispness that I associate with burning leaves. There's probably a much smarter way to describe it. This Marzen doesn't smell much different to me. But it's a little bit sweeter. This beer is not, both of these are crisp beers. This one is not quite as crisp. It is definitely not like drinking a Pilsner, like that a basic Oktoberfest is. A little richer malt in this. The crispness that you get off of it is a combination of the balance with the hop, although I don't taste the hop really specifically. And these will both have been made with traditional German hops, which are going to give you just a little bit of spice in their nature. So that little bit of spice from the hop blends with a little bit of tart bitterness that I think comes out of the malt itself that's used in this beer. So a little malty, a little bit more sweet than this first one, although still not a particularly sweet beer. Very refreshing, nice beer. So this third one, this is an Oktoberfest made by my friends over at Westside Brewing Company. Now this beer looks more like an American version of an Oktoberfest. And again, when we compare these three beers, we look at these three beers from a color profile standpoint. These two are pretty similar. This West 6 is pretty similar to the Marzen, but it's a little bit darker and it's a little bit more cloudy. Now what I'm going to anticipate with this beer, I haven't tasted it yet this year, but I'm going to expect to taste a little bit more sweetness than I got out of the Marzen. So my anticipation is that in terms of how much a kind of darker malt comes through in these beers, we're going to see that progress from this one, lightest and least amount, up through this West side. I'm drinking all these a little bit too cold, so I'm not getting a whole lot of aroma off of any of them. Definitely a sweeter beer. I think this is still a nice, well-balanced, drinkable beer. More of the malt comes through on this than even this Pollen or Marzen. I also get a little bit of kind of sweetness and a little bit of that malt on sort of the back side of my tongue with this beer. So it doesn't finish quite as crisp as these German versions. It finishes a little bit sweeter, and you're getting a little bit more of the malt in it. And I think it's a very nice beer, although that is what's very common of, again, U.S. Oktoberfest styles, is they tend to be very malt forward, and they tend to be a little bit sweeter than kind of the original German style namesake. And that can go from being a little bit sweet or tasting sort of similar, or sometimes very similar to the original German versions, to being really way too cloyingly sweet. I don't find that with this. I like this beer, but definitely more of the malt coming through than with the Germans. So let's move on, although not up, to a pumpkin beer. Now I picked this beer, this Brooklyn Brewery pumpkin beer. Why? Because who cares? It's a pumpkin beer, and in my personal opinion, they all suck. But a lot of people really love pumpkin beers. So I thought that despite the fact that this is going to pain me, that we should drink one, because a lot of you probably, if you've never had them before, you might like them a lot, and you may already know that you like them. And you're not alone. A lot of people like pumpkin beers. What you get from pumpkin beers, and the reason that I typically don't like them, some of them are fine, but what happens with a pumpkin beer is that generally what makes it a pumpkin beer is that they're using spices. Often they're using spices that are similar in flavor profile, sometimes the exact same spices that you would use to make a pumpkin pie. So that's what is going to make a pumpkin beer a pumpkin beer. And I don't know what spice I'm smelling on the head of this, but I'm definitely smelling a spice. Taste a little bit of cinnamon to this. I taste mostly cinnamon to this. So it's spicy. To me, it's cinnamony. This Brooklyn Brewery is old school craft. These guys have been around for a long time. They started brewing in Brooklyn back when Brooklyn was still really a rough neighborhood, and it was real estate was really cheap. So they're actually interesting from a business model standpoint, because much like Great Lakes Brewery afterwards, actually, Brooklyn Brewery bought real estate in Brooklyn, and they started making really fantastic beers there. I don't remember what year they were founded, but I'm thinking it was maybe sometime in the 80s. They're a real holdout from a couple of waves of craft. So Brooklyn's been around. They've been making great beer all that time. As a result, they got really popular and they got really big. And they could not expand in their original location because they had helped make the neighborhood around them a really cool, desirable place to be. So this brewery, by virtue of its own success, actually increased real estate values around it so much that the brewery itself couldn't afford real estate around it. So it's kind of a victim of its own success. And Great Lakes actually had a very similar problem in the neighborhood of Ohio City in Cleveland. It was a neighborhood that was kind of falling on hard times when Great Lakes moved in there. In, again, I don't recall, but I think we're talking about the early 90s, something like late 80s, early 90s for Great Lakes. They've been around for quite a while now. So Great Lakes moved into Ohio City when Ohio City was still a little bit rough and real estate was cheap. And if you've never been there, I highly recommend it, because in addition to making great beers, Great Lakes has a beautiful tap room. It's nice space, and I haven't been there for a long time, but when I used to live in Cleveland, I went there a lot. The food was really good. So this beer, October Halloween themed, the Nosferatu from Great Lakes. This is an Imperial Red Ale. So again, when we talk about imperial beers, what do we mean? We traditionally mean a higher ABV. Although this beer from Great Lakes has been around for a while, so by current standards, it's not crazy in terms of its ABV. It's actually just 8%. These days, Great Lakes, particularly when you get into winter beers, they make beers with a lot higher ABV than this. Nevertheless, at 8%, that's high enough to call it imperial. Now, this is a red ale, and that's going to mean that, excuse me, that's going to mean that you're going to use a lot of amber malt in the production of this beer. And you can see that from the color of it. It is very amber in color. But when you smell this beer, despite the fact that when you look at it, coloration of this tells you that you're going to get a lot of the malt, and you're going to get an amber malt in it, maybe a little caramel malt in it. So what I'm going to expect to taste in this beer is some sweetness, maybe a little bit of burnt flavor to it, and a little bit of caramelization is what I'm going to expect from looking at this beer. But when I smell this beer, I smell hops. I smell nice, dank West Coast hops. So let's taste it. And when I taste this beer, I get both of those things. So this is a big beer. There's a lot of malt to this, but there is also a lot of hop in it. So you get some sweetness. That was a squirrel checking in to the bar here. We don't serve them, but they try. So I get a really big beer that has this bit of malt coming through. So there is definitely a sweetness that comes through in this beer, but that really dank hop, it does something really unique to it. I mean, it makes it hoppy and it makes it bitter, although I don't think it makes it crisp. I don't know how many of these that I could drink, but it's definitely an interesting beer. There's a lot happening with it. It's rare that you can taste. When we kind of started this class, I told you that you should never again say that a beer is both really malty and really hoppy, because you're going to have one of those two flavors really shine through in a beer. Or else you're going to have a beer like this first Oktoberfest that's just really well balanced. This beer, I'm going to tell you, is a rare outlier in that it breaks that rule. I think that this beer, I would actually describe this beer as both really malty and really hoppy. And interesting as a result. I dig it. I hope you'll like it as well. Now these pumpkin beers, back to these for a second. I tend to not like these beers that are really heavily spiced. And pumpkin beers are one of those beers. Christmas beers are also one of those beers. So we're not quite into the Christmas beer season yet, but we will be there soon. And I think that most Christmas beers, in my personal opinion, fail for the same reason that pumpkin beers fail. They tend to be overly spiced. But that is not, they don't have to be that way. And there are good ones out there. And actually Great Lakes has consistently made one of the best Christmas ales of any brewery in the U.S. for the past 20 some years or so. So when their Christmas beer comes out, I highly recommend it. And you can try some of those. They are different from the pumpkin beers in that they're different in the spices that they use, but they're very similar in the fact that they're very malt forward, and even beyond the malt, it's the adjuncts that you taste in them. You know, it is those flavors. It's the spices. It's with this. I have no idea what's in this beer, but and I might be completely wrong. But from my taste buds, God, there's something in it beyond cinnamon that I cannot name, and it's something that I smell, but I'm just blanking on what it is I'm smelling. But it definitely tastes cinnamon in it. So as we get into winter and as we get into cooler months, I'm not going to open these two beers because I've got to finish these. I'm not a savage, and if I open a beer, I'm going to finish it, and I don't want to drink that much tonight. So I'm not going to open this Black Butte Porter from Deschutes, but I will tell you that as we're heading into cooler months, you know, we're heading into porter and stout months. When it starts to get cold, there is nothing better than a really nice stout or a porter. Now this Deschutes Porter, I think, is hands down one of the best porters made in the U.S. Westside Brewing here locally also started making a really delicious porter this year. I have mentioned Wooden Cask Brewery in Newport before. Wooden Cask is my favorite winter brewery. I don't get that motivated to go there as much in the summer because they do some nice summer beers, but their thing is really mostly porters, stouts, browns, those things that are a little bit sweet, just a little bit kind of more warming on a winter day. They also do a lot of bourbon barrel-aged beers that I have no use for in July or August, but I love on a nice cold December or January day. I also picked up this Evil Twin Brewing 90-day dry-aged stout, and this is a milk stout made with dry-aged malt. So I don't really know exactly what to expect from this beer. I think it's going to be an interesting beer, but again, I'm not going to open it right now. But Evil Twin makes some good stuff. So if you're at the Party Source and you're picking up some of these beers, pick one of these up and let me know what you think. And as we get into winter, if you want to really kind of push yourself, get into porters, you know, start to really try to dig some of these darker beers. The Founders that we tasted earlier in this class is hands down one of my two favorite porters traditionally. This Deschutes is another. And Westside Brewing, again, they're making a porter this year that I think is absolutely pitch perfect. There's a lot of really nice chocolate notes to it, and I thought it was delicious. So that's the fall season. We've got Oktoberfest, we've got pumpkin beers, we've got some vampire beers, and we are also heading into porter, stout, milk stout season, and pretty soon we'll be into Christmas beer season. So get a little bit darker as we get into the fall and the cold months, and do a little exploring. You've learned some things, so go out there in the world and try them out. I'm going to sign off. and then I'm gonna get drunk.